Marshal Rokossovsky leads the parade, together with Marshal Zhukov.
Alright, so before I really get into this, I just want to show once again that, pretty soon this whole COVID stuff is going to have to die down eventually, and eventually things are going to have to come to normal. And with that, we're going to wait for the new long-form alt-right playbook video from none other than Ian Danskin, aka Innuendo Studios. But in time, I'm gonna go ahead and critique one of these videos, and notice I got the spirit of Georgy Zhukov. Arguably, you go back and forth, for my tanky audience, they're like, oh, Rokossovsky did more of this and that. I'm not gonna argue with you, but I think that Zhukov on the horse here, that's some great aesthetics right there. So I'm gonna use him. And you know what? Let's just get right into this, okay?
Fascism is a term I've heard thrown around since I was a kid, but most of the time, idiomatically. Fascist is what you called your type A passive-aggressive roommate. Stop being such a fascist, Deborah. Through osmosis, I knew its literal meaning was among a cluster of related words: authoritarianism, totalitarianism, white supremacy, nationalism, dictatorship. But for much of my life, if you pressed me to define any of these words, I could have only said, Nazis, Hitler, the Gestapo, Nazis? This colloquialized.
So first off, he's kind of showing what he's doing right here is he's trying to, present this to the normie audience right now. This is kind of what he's doing a little bit by saying, oh, Karen, you silly white woman, this is what he's trying to do. So, I hate the way he pronounced, what is it? When I hear him do the, he does that censorship, I'm just like, what are you doing, bruh? That's kind of annoying. But, right here is that he's obviously trying to connect with the normie audience and bring them in. Once again, I'm getting my degree in marketing, so I'm trying to understand the way, also how public relations may work, this and that, and it just sounds like, he's really doing his best to bring these folks in. So he's starting with that. He's trying to be more, relatable. So let's continue on.
Of fascism and its association with the cultural shorthand for pure evil makes it very hard to discuss as an ideology, because even using the word fascism sounds both hyperbolic and like a punch below the belt. To call a person, group, or idea fascist is to exaggerate for the purpose of dragging them. This counterintuitively prevents us from criticizing fascist groups, even though most everyone agrees fascism is terrible, because saying it, you sound ridiculous. You're talking about Indiana Jones villains. So I'm going to be using the word fascism kind of a lot in this video, hoping that we can semantically satiate it just enough that its connotative meanings, irreverent sarcasm, and the envisioning of stormtroopers, are dulled to the point that we can talk about fascism as a system of beliefs and as a mode of political organizing, and about who practices it today.
So I will give my man Ian Danskin some credit here. He says pretty much in this is that, well, it's ridiculous and everything to call someone Nazis. Like, well, they all died off. This is something that was used in Charlottesville, and this type of argument was used, over and over. It's like, well, Nazis don't exist anymore. So now he's going to, I believe the word inoculate is what he's going to do. He's going to inoculate folks, and he's going to get in some very, he's going to go very pseudo-intellectual here to try to explain things very simply and matter-of-factly so that he can describe it. And of course, the title of this video is not fascism, it's white fascism. You have to remember that. That is the title of this video. So he's very specifically laying that out. Now, of course, fascism, came from Italy, which, of course, we always make the joke that Italians are really black folks, but that's a whole other story, isn't it? I'm just saying is that let's be mindful of what this dude has to say. Let's continue on, shall we?
Our work necessitates a conversation about fascism, specifically white fascism. Fascism, fascism, fascism. Central to fascism is the belief that some people are more deserving of power than others, and that society's appropriate structure is a hierarchy where increasingly smaller groups of betters rule over the lessers. This is not unique to fascism. This is the organizing principle of many social systems. The differences between systems is whom each hierarchy says should be at the top. In a feudal monarchy, the top is the king and his family, and they get there by royal bloodline. In a capitalist free market, people earn their place at the top by success in business. In fascism, the ones at the top should be us, whomever us happens to be, and they should get there by any means available. The most succinct definition of fascism comes from Roger Griffin: palingenetic ultranationalism. A wonderful term because it fits a great many ideas into only 2 roots and a bunch of affixes, and a terrible one because both words need definitions of their own. So, okay, palingenesis is the...
Alright, so we saw that little bit there. And of course, we saw the nice little triangles and everything else trying to make it seem like, oh, well, monarchy is just the same, the same ideology as fascism. It's like, really? I don't think that's the case, but all right, there are plenty of Michelingans that were, in the German army and everything else. And of course, look at, people like Rosenberg. The guy was part Jewish, of course. And guess what? He was in the, he was writing propaganda and did, was the not foreign minister, but, he was involved pretty deeply in the Nazi hierarchy. Now, of course, but that's the whole thing, though, is that, well, it doesn't really mean this and that, but ultimately, this is the type of feijoa that we're dealing with, And once again, I await the video. I know eventually he's going to have to make a video talking about China. Of course, I know what he'll say probably is that, I'm not really that, focused on China, this and that. We need to just get rid of Trump. But anyway, I think it's just utterly ridiculous what he's trying to do. And of course, we have to use the big words like palingenetic nationalism or stochastic terrorism to show that we are the real big-brained sort of dudes. Anyway, let's continue on.
The idea of rebirth, with some frankly biblical overtones. The word palingenesis is used to refer to reincarnation, or the remaking of the world after Judgment Day. In terms of fascism, it is the notion that we, as a unified people, are ancient, that our former glory has waned, and that we are due to rise again. And the implication that this rebirth will come by purging the world in fire with boiling seas and a blood-red sky are not entirely accidental. It is the granting of us with mythological importance. Nationalism is, in the broadest sense, thinking of oneself through the lens of national identity. A single person holds a lot of identities. White, male, gamer, New Englander, cyclist, sports racer, and so on and so forth. Nationalism is the lens through which thinking of oneself as, for instance, American is distinct from being Canadian, Liberian, Chilean, and that putting stock in this distinction is desirable. This can play out a lot of different ways. Nationalism can be a colonized people forming an identity distinct from the ruling class and arguing that this people should have its own state, as in the American or Haitian revolutions. Black nationalism has argued, at times, that Black Americans, while coexisting with other Americans, should maintain a distinct identity rather than be assimilated into white culture. And where Black nationalism has also sometimes argued for the repatriation of Black Americans to African nations, white nationalism typically argues that whites should have a nation of their own, not by returning to Europe, but by removing non-whites from the US.
So we see here once again is he immediately tries to define things and whatnot. And he knew what some people were going to say once he gave that whole speech about our people were great, but now we need to rebuild that. And of course, so I said, and of course, the whataboutism, of course, is what about black nationalism? What about the ideas of people like Marcus Garvey, or people like Dr. John Henrik Clarke and people like that? You're not going to talk, once again, they don't even use those names. He doesn't even want to use those names. Sometimes they want to do that. And of course, the only crutch that they have is the Black Panthers. This is the only crutch that they have. And of course, the Black Panthers fell apart for various reasons, which, of course, a lot of these bread tubers and a lot of these white leftists, these Bizor, don't want to talk about, do they? They don't want to talk about why it fell apart. People like Soul on Ice. I cannot think of the dude's name offhand. I'm trying to think of it. Eldridge Cleaver, who was a rapist, this and that. They don't, but they, once again, the disingenuousness is already there. He doesn't want to talk about it. He's just like, well, black nationals should go back to their country. He forgets, of course, is that, there was the idea of New Africa. And, of course, the Afro-American, unity, Organization of Unity, which Malcolm X set up along with, once again, Dr. John Henrik Clarke, which was talking about black separatism, which talked about New Africa and all that sort of thing. This is what the Nation of Islam also talks about. So, of course, he's already being disingenuous. Secondly, on the actual point that he's talking about, is the idea that, white Americans, don't want to go back to Europe. Well, some do, and they want to have pan-Europeanism. The reality, though, and of course, this is something that he doesn't want to research, is that, the love 56% meme. The idea that white folks are, white folks in the United States are never going to be seen as European, which is true. This is why a lot of folks talk about that instead. You know what I'm saying? So it has to be put into context, which he doesn't want to understand, or that he prefers to say ignorant about. So we'll keep it there. All right.
Something Native Americans have opinions about. This would be an example of ultranationalism, the emphasizing of national identity as among the most, if not the most, important. Now, these are not unique traits, and I want to stress that it is not the presence, but the confluence of them that gives fascism its character. So, palingenetic ultranationalism, the belief that the nation is of the utmost importance, that the people running the nation should be a narrowly defined us, and that we should rule because it's more or less our destiny. The religiosity of this framing is intentional. Most hierarchical systems will make some case for why society should be structured a certain way. The king has been groomed for his role since birth. Steve Jobs did real good at the business factory. Fascism suspends the need for explanation. We belong at the top because we just do. Destiny. When pressed, fascists will offer pseudo-rational justifications for why they should be in charge, which fall apart under the barest scrutiny. But debunking these claims is largely ineffective because, while they follow the cadences of a reasoned argument, they're operating on the level of emotion, faith, and a sense of belonging. There's a reason fascist regimes rely heavily on propaganda. Propaganda traffics...
Alright, just like the last response video that I did to Redfish, I'm not going to show... I'm going to cut out some bits here, because ultimately... Now, the reason for this is because he shows clips of Nazi propaganda, and you know what? I just don't feel like promoting that. I don't want to promote that. I don't want to show images of that. because I'm not stupid. And I've already gotten 2 strikes as it is. And by the time I release this is probably going to be September. But realistically, I just don't want to show it. So if you want to, you can watch the whole video, this and that. You can find that you can just type in white fascism and there you go. So just to let y'all know up front. Now, the thing is that you notice that he doesn't play any clips of, what's his face there, the Swedish Jew. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, the golden one, that's it, yeah. Doesn't listen to any clips of him, this and that. Doesn't want to platform fascists, which of course is the proper thing to do nowadays, is that you don't platform fascists. We don't platform that. And this is going to be a problem later on, of course. And you're going to see more of a lightening of these things in time if they want to be more relevant to people. And, you'll see all this sort of stuff that goes on. You see all this sort of, this person wears a red hat, so they must be a fascist, this and that. And this is the sort of stuff that goes on. And it's going to be interesting, to say the least, what's going to happen in the future. And how this is going to be seen, Because obviously, the Bolsheviks did the same type of thing, where it's like, this person maybe practiced this type of thing, and, there are plenty of people who were in the bureaucratic part of, the Nazi Party, and those folks were still part of the German Democratic Republic and were part of the government. There are German Wehrmacht officers who helped to create the NVA, the East German Army. So I think that has to be put in perspective, folks, once again. And we're going to have to move away from this sort of, these people are bad and these people are good. That's going to be changing. If they want to be relevant, that is. Let's carry on.
Family, or the countryside. The babe in his cradle is closing his eyes, the blossom embraces the bee, and ties those images to fascist ideals. But soon, says a whisper, arise, arise, tomorrow belongs to me. All of this is meant to make one swell with pride in such a way that it's very hard to think about what is actually being said. Racist caricatures of black and Jewish people, or whomever is not us in any given system, serve the same purpose by evoking hatred, or fear of what might happen to us if they were in control.
Now, we're going to hear a critique of Israel. No, we're not. We are not going to delve into that. He doesn't do videos about other countries. He doesn't talk about other, areas, this and that. He is very Americentric. And you have to realize that with Ian Danskin's videos, or Innuendo Studios videos. He is very much, he of course is Mr. Guy who talked about movies and has evolved into talking about this alt-right playbook and, these footnotes and all this other stuff. The thing is, though, is that once again, he is a very Americentric person. He does not focus on talking about other countries, even though he wants to talk about, the Jews, this and that. But ultimately, he doesn't want to talk about the actual issues with Israel. He doesn't want to do that. I'm sorry, I'm just repeating myself. I do realize that. But once again, he makes it seem as though this sort of attitude isn't experienced in a good way in places like, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea or North Korea. He doesn't talk about that. This, or even with China, with Han supremacy and that sort of idea. But of course, like I say, once again, he is Americentric. And so, we've seen him bring up a lot of intersectionality aspects. We've seen him, use more of this influence of us versus them. And to me, that's an oversimplification. Because ultimately, a lot of people feel that way. As I've said before in my videos, is the idea of when worst comes to worst, my peoples come first. And of course, when people ask, well, where do you get that from? That comes from Mobb Deep. And so, you have to put it into context, once again, of how these words are used. So the thing is that, we don't want to mix with white folks and everything else. We want to have our own culture. Doesn't say a word. And he just says, just some. But, once again, he limits himself. And he doesn't want to talk about that. He doesn't want to talk about nature of Islam. He doesn't want to talk about those other issues. No. So he stays to his little one-track mind. And he focuses on those certain issues that he feels are important. And that is the way he is. Let's continue on. Let's hear some more of this.
Jason Stanley calls this affective override, the moment where emotion shuts down critical thinking. If you've ever had a conversation with a conservative about, like, healthcare or something, and after a few exchanges they're chest beating about how this is the nation of freedom and choice, the greatest nation that ever was, and I'm not going to let you take from me my God-given... You've seen this in action. Fascism depends on this passionate fervor because it can't convincingly pretend to be rational. The reason why
So this is an argument that is always very relevant, that you have to put into context once again. He compares conservatism with fascism. And while there is some overlap, and of course you can see this throughout history, but of course, Mr. Danskin does not want to do this. And like I say, just to make sure here, Ian Danskin is his name. It is in his title. You can find it very easily. I am not doxing him. I just want to make sure on that. I'm just using his name just because it sounds easier. Anyway, the thing is that he has to say with it, conservatives and fascists have some connection. This goes back to the alt-right pipeline and that sort of thing. The reality is, though, is that if you listen to people like Keith Woods and other folks like that, is that they try to make the distinction all the time that conservatives do not speak for us. And while they may be socially conservative, that's what, a lot of fascists are, or whatever you want to say, is that, Nazbols or whatever the case may be are, is that we don't see eye to eye with a lot of things. Once again, you have to take a look at people like TPUSA. And the whole Groyper War business that happened, 2 years ago now, it seems like? Hell, I don't even know. But anyway, the battle between, allowing a gay black dude to say that he's conservative versus, someone that calls themselves, the true conservative or a fascist. And so it has to be put into context once again. And, I've said context already too much. I apologize. So I'll try to use that word a bit less. But the thing is that we have to understand is that but you have to understand that there is a difference between these two things. Now, of course, they're making a lot of the bad links, and I'm already looking at a clip here from a little bit ahead. My goodness, this is a shit show. But we shall continue on. We shall soldier on, and we will drive on with the mission and finish this video, folks. We're going to do it.
Particular us should be at the top of the hierarchy, or why there should even be a hierarchy in the first place, is arbitrary. It's that way because a particular us wants it that way. We usually associate fascism with the image of state violence, be it the punishing of the other, the policing of citizens, or the conquering of other nations. And while this is almost always the case, fascism is not, as a rule, militant. In practice, fascists are not authoritarians or pacifists. For that matter, they're not capitalists or anti-capitalists. They're not statists or anarchists. They're not monarchists, oligarchists, or plutocrats. They are whatever puts us in power-ists. For instance, capitalism is a hierarchical system, and so fascists will often try to influence policy such that the capitalist hierarchy starts to resemble the desired fascist one, but only until the point that it stops suiting their needs. The us of fascism is always defined by essential qualities like race or heritage, qualities that don't change. A poor person can become less poor, but a black person can't become less black. So
now, of course, the thing is, once again, is that he oversimplifies a little bit by saying whatever gets us into power ists. And the thing is that, once again, the left would do the same thing, whatever gets them into power. They can claim to be this and that, but it's the same type of thing, the same argument that we see right now with people like Vosh or, others like that who support Biden because he's basically just better than Trump. The thing is, the reality is that, a lot of ways, they're pretty much the same, and that ultimately all Biden is doing is just giving lip service. In actuality, he probably won't make that much of a difference. We're seeing a lot of this back and forth sort of nonsense go on. But of course, I'm recording this video on August 8th, 2020. So by the time this comes out, at least, I'm sure, one or more of the debates will have happened, and we're, watching those shit shows, of course, will be hilarious. But anyway, let me cut to the chase. The thing is that, Mr. I'm gonna sound like Mr. Thought Slime. I'm sorry, I was thinking Caleb Maupin. What Ian Danskin will leave out, of course, is that once again, people like George Lincoln Rockwell made deals with the Nation of Islam, which of course he will not talk about. And so that needs, and we see here that, actually, you can say, well, whatever gets us into power, that could go with any revolutionary group. You have to put it into, actually, I'm not even going to say that, I'm sorry. But the thing is, it's just absolutely ridiculous to simplify it and just say, well, whatever gets us into power. That kind of works with everybody, doesn't it? So yeah, anyway, we're going to go ahead and keep it there. Let's go ahead and keep it moving, folks.
No matter how biased and stratified capitalism becomes, so long as it is still technically possible for someone from the lower classes to rise above their station, there will come a time when fascists must leave capitalism behind in favor of a system fully without social mobility. Similarly, if fascists have the ability to take governmental control through non-violent means, they will often do so. Remember, Mussolini took power in a coup. Hitler was elected. If democracy and non-violence can be put to fascist ends, they will be. But instituting a system that benefits the few while the many suffer, and where, by design, no one suffering is allowed to improve their situation, might as well be writing ad copy for guillotines, and that's how you get the SS. So, yes, fascist...
Once again, I have to realize is that he is saying this for a normie audience. I'm sure that there are college classes that are going to be going on in August who I'm sure have already used this video, or that this is to talk to normie conservative boomers, or whatever the case may be, who are going to be watching this and saying, oh, well, yeah, that's true. So he is aiming for that sort of audience. But also the fact is that Mr. Ian Danskin does not want to research the history. He already has his mind made up. The fact is that, you can say, oh, well, that's basically the SS. Basically the SS. Well, you're not even going to talk about the SA, are you? You're not even going to talk about the Night of the Long Knives. You're not even going to talk about Ernst Röhm and the street battles that went on. You're not going to talk about the issues with with people like, I don't know, with the issues of the Social Democratic Party trying to remain relevant and making deals with, the different, I cannot think of the words. Anyway, it's ridiculous to me that he wants to leave those things out and just say, well, basically you have the SS, without understanding the history of the SS, without understanding what happened with that, and understanding the depth of it. This is something that we need to realize and understand. The thing is that he mentioned Gestapo at the beginning. The fact is that most of the Gestapo was made up of snitches. This is something that needs to be put into context once again. The Gestapo was mostly made up of snitches, and that was their power. Same type of thing with the cops. The cops get their information from informants. My trusted informants, or my snitches who I can talk to. So, of course, like I say, once again, is the understanding of how these organizations worked is a huge mistake. I should say that it is... They purposely keep things ignorant, and they want to stay ignorant. These type of folks... they don't want to understand the deeper history. And we'll just leave it there, I guess, for that little segment.
Power trends towards authoritarianism because on a long enough timeline, it will be the only way fascism can maintain itself. But also, fascists and authoritarians think power, brutality, and subjugation are sexy in more or less identical ways. So, while not all authoritarians are fascists, most fascists are authoritarians. And state violence is often a way of getting people invested in a hierarchy that doesn't directly benefit them. You may not be at the...
My real question about that segment is, of course, the whole, blank, X is not Y. But a lot of the time, Y equals X, that sort of thing. I mean, we're doing the algebra type of thing. But of course, I don't understand, of course, the idea of one of the bombers. I believe that was the 30 seconds over Tokyo. The bombing that happened in 1942, I believe, Doolittle's raiders, basically. And the ones that were shot down and were captured and were executed by the Japanese. I don't really get that whole type of thing, the whole idea is, of course, he doesn't want to upset his tanky audience or upset some MLs that are out there. So I think that's why he did that. Now, in other videos, he has attacked Stalin a bit more and tried to, or at least given some subliminal, attacks on him. But I think in a lot of ways, I think he wants to keep, once again, he wants to keep this simple for boomers to understand. I think that, he may have some of this in mind. I'm sure that he has a checklist. I'm sure he has kind of an idea of what his audience is and who he wants to reach. So he had to put that into context. I'm sorry. Context. I should just scream context. Each of these things. But that's what he's trying to do here. So he's trying to make it easier to digest. The problem is that there's going to be other people who know a little bit about history, even people like me, who are fairly normie, will say, what are you trying to get at there, Bacon? And with that, let's go ahead and continue on.
The top, but if you're somewhere around the middle, we can employ you as military or police to keep the lower classes in line. Many people will relinquish their rights to fascists in exchange for being the arm of the law. And the more powerful the state becomes, the more vicarious power they get to wield. So long as they're not at the bottom, they have some investment in the system continuing as is, because it authorizes them to fuck people up. The other way fascism justifies itself to the masses is to insist that the only alternative is death. We are a great and noble people with an illustrious history, and if we achieve our fated rebirth, we will form the most glorious nation in all of history and take our rightful place as world leader, and if we fail, we will be eradicated. There's no...
So 2 points is, he doesn't want to talk about the capos at the Jewish ghettos. He doesn't want to, he alluded to it, but he didn't want to say those specific words. And also, the fact is, when they say we will be eradicated, this is the same type of thing of what I imagine. These protesters are saying now is that these black police officers are class traitors, this and that. I guess that's the whole type of thing. Now, of course, Ian Danskin will not want to do that. I don't think he doesn't want to go that far. Like I say, he wants to maintain his pseudo-intellectual credentials, and he doesn't want to talk about race in the same type of way. You can already see with that earlier clip where he was talking about black nationalism, he doesn't want to discuss those details of race. Once again, he just wants to be careful. He doesn't want to get involved with that. He is trying to, once again, he's trying to simplify it and just hit right to the point. And good, bad, right, or wrong, he does that pretty well. I have to say, don't hate the player, hate the game. But ultimately, when he gives the whole clip of we will be eradicated, there is some truth to that, especially when you consider, of course, what happened with the Germans in Czechoslovakia, the ethnic Germans who were shot and were, even kids were executed, the millions who were put into camps, this and that. Now, of course, I know, like I say, I'm going too Wignet. I apologize. I was trying not to go too Wignet, but people who watch this and who have already had that sort of programming, dare I say it, would already say these types of things and say, let's just, once again, I can already see the clip here. We got some good stuff coming up. So I'll keep it there. Let's move on.
In between. They are coming for us. They are everywhere. We can beat them, but this is the only way. Race war is the usual go-to, claiming black people are savages and razing our cities to the ground is their nature, or that they want revenge for slavery, which, I mean, sometimes they go with a Jewish conspiracy as revenge for the Holocaust, or both at the same time. Right now, Islamophobia is in fashion. Each depends on downplaying slavery or the Holocaust or the Crusades as the horrific acts that they were, insisting that the crimes have been greatly exaggerated by history, because these are all pretty damning counter-arguments to us being the greatest people who have ever lived.
Alright, so he says, of course, is that, and I will say this, of course, is a lot of these riots that have happened and whatnot, a lot of it is white folks. In general. Apart from some, some of the gay and bisexual black folks, which a lot of the black community, I'm just going to say it, rightfully disowns a lot of those folks who talk about, that they're bisexual or whatever the case may be, or they call themselves Maoists, people like Black Red Guard. The fact is, though, is that what should I say here? I mean, I think it's absolutely ridiculous, to say the least, where it's just like, well, these horrible acts, it's like, and then of course he points at this was us, and it's like, people that were picking cotton, that was us, that was the us. I mean, I guess it's once again, I guess this is for the very ignorant boomer who doesn't really know what's going on. So I think, that's the context of it, and it looks like we're going to be getting into some Robin DiAngelo type stuff here, so let's listen on, shall we?
Race is like gender and money. It's real, but only because we make it real. But fascism necessitates the belief that whatever makes us, us, is not only extremely real in the biological and or spiritual sense, but that people can be ranked by it. And when stacking the hierarchy, white fascists put themselves at the top. So, what is whiteness? Well, the short answer is that whiteness is whatever.
And as we've seen through recent articles, is that whiteness, whatever it needs to be, doesn't just work for fascism. It also works for people like Robin DiAngelo. It also works for other folks that say, well, white folks are, hardworking and Christian and delay gratification and those types of things as well. So it also works on that level. I think it was the Air and Space Museum that did that, I think. Or maybe I'm mistaken. I think it was the Smithsonian. Either way, you can go ahead and look it up yourself. But it's very interesting, of course, how that works. This whole intersectionality type of thing. And of course, they don't want to cede any sort of argument over to fascists or whatever the case may be, especially when they talk about, the differences between blood types, the differences between cultures, this and that. Now, of course, I'm trying to be very careful here when I say these things, but they don't want to cede that territory. They're just gonna be like, nope, it's all made up. We make it real because we, it's not real, but it's something we make real. It's all just made up. We need these things to defend our racism and defend our hierarchy, this and that. This is their idea. Now, of course, the thing is that their hierarchy will be based on, well, whatever you want it to be. The thing is that the idea that their hierarchy won't be based on race is nonsense, because of course it will be. Intersectionality will be based on those types of things as well. But anyway, let's continue forward, shall we?
Whatever it needs to be. Whiteness was created to differentiate one people from the people they were oppressing. Whiteness is a means to an end. And the people most fixated with the definition of whiteness are racists, but there is no anti-racist definition. Racists invented whiteness, and all white people are folded into it. And the way white people conceive of whiteness is fundamentally different from how they conceive of other races. A common example of this phenomenon is Barack Obama. Obama had one black parent and one white parent. But while he can call himself the first black president, he could never call himself a white president. Or, well, he could call himself whatever he wanted, but white people wouldn't agree, and no one would treat him like a white president. White people are only white if they're purebreeds, or if non-whiteness is far enough back in their family tree that one can pretend it isn't there. These rules of purity don't apply to other races. When black and white people have children, those children are allowed to be black, or any number of often racist terms for mixed-race children. But whatever they are, they can't be white. This frames interracial families as an increase of one race and a decrease in whites. So, by this logic, where other races spread, whiteness has to be maintained. White people don't consider whiteness a race. It is the absence of race, the undiluted form of which all other races are deviations. And if it goes, it can't be brought back. This is, of course, nonsense.
Okay, so let's start with Barack Obama here for a minute. Okay, so the thing is with Barack Obama is that, yes, he was mixed race. The thing is, though, is that his mother was hugely racist, this and that, and, Barack Obama was had a hectic home life, to say the least. I think that's something, of course, that Ian Danskin does not want to bring up, because he knows that he does not want to cede anything to, the racists or to conservatives or, any of these types of folks. They don't want to cede anything like that. No. We're going to hold still to this idea. And of course, I think it's interesting, of course, also to talk about with black nationalism, with a lot of these pro-black folks, is that they don't like interracial dating either. The issue, though, is that what makes black nationalism, what makes people like, I'm trying to think of your name now. I cannot think of it. Anyway, what makes these types of folks more, they're easier to discuss, and is that they say, well, the mixed kid still has melanin, so that's still a good thing. They still have that melanin, which is a good thing. That's why they talk about Cuba, this and that. This is how the Nation of Islam is able to survive. Because they say is that, well, there's a lot of black folks that are in Cuba, so, people like Louis Farrakhan were able to go to Cuba and have a connection with Castro. So, the thing is that, we have to realize once again with the Nation of Islam is that, as has been said, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was mixed. He himself, I believe, had a white mother and a black father. So it has to be put into some sort of understanding to really understand how these things work and understand, it's not just grandparent cry, that there's also a deeper level to it. It's the same type of thing, it's similar with how mixed kids are seen by, it's like, you'll hear that insult from black folks. Look at his high yellow ass coming around here, and this type of thing. So it has to be put in, we have to understand how these things work, and colorism. And of course, he doesn't discuss this, because like I say, once again, he does not want to cede that point. Continue.
It's a bunch of made-up rules to justify white supremacy. There's only so long fascists can insist if we don't strike first, they're going to kill us all, before people start to notice that the race war they've been promising for a century doesn't seem to be happening. So then the terms have to be updated. Now the existential threat is a generational project. Now black people even existing near white people is the race war. They're literally going to fuck us out of existence. And because whiteness is made up, it can be endlessly redefined. A tension inherent to fascism is that rather a lot of people are required to bring it into existence, but by design only a small number will run it once it exists. So commonly the definition of us is broadened while building coalitions, and gets progressively narrower the more fascist society becomes. White fascists in the US and Europe go back and forth on whether or not Jewish people get to be white. For a while it was kind of a soft yes, and now it's tipping the other way as they gain influence. Ethnic groups formerly considered non-white, like Italians and the Irish, became white when white culture feared marginalized immigrants might ally with slaves in revolt.
So that's an oversimplification, to say the least. The thing is that Jews have specifically said that we are not white. Whether it's the Ashkenazi and all that business. Of course, there are channels which I saw one yesterday. It was absolutely hilarious. that was talking about, well, Ashkenazi, the Ashkenazi Empire didn't exist, or that, the Khazarian Empire didn't really exist, actually, and that, and the other. But the thing is that, the whole thing is that, once again, with Israel, we have a lot of leaders that are Ashkenazi. We have people like, of course, people like Netanyahu. Of course, his family comes from Poland, I believe. Same type of thing with the first president of Israel. Originally, was in England, but I think his family came from Russia originally. Chaim Weizmann. So the thing is, once again, this is something that a lot of anti-Zionists use, is that really, they'll say that the Katsir brothers or whoever else, or that people like Menachem Begin, they're actually Polish or Russian or whatever the case may be. They're not actually, Israeli. And this is something that you have to be careful with. The next thing that I would say is that in general, we look at the idea of Castizo futurism. The idea that, of course, he mentions, of course, he simplifies it literally to black and white. The thing is, of course, is that he doesn't want to talk about the rise of, Mexicans or El Salvadorans, this and that. He doesn't talk about those things. So it has to be put into, well, you know what? I'm sorry. I should just take a drink every time I say context. Man, I would be drunk by this point. But the thing is that he doesn't know how to put things into the proper. He doesn't really do very good research. I'll just put it that way. So let's carry on. Looks like there's some good stuff coming up here. So let's see. One last point. I was going to say with the Italians and the Irish in particular, the thing is, what he doesn't talk about, of course, is the fact that they say, oh, well, they were just worried about being replaced, so they allowed the Italians and Irish in there. It's a little, once again, this kind of mixed history. Once again, I suspect you should look at the history of the labor movement. You should look at the history of how the Italians, through the mafia, and I know that's kind of prejudice, but and through the efforts of opening up small businesses, the Irish joining the infamous Tammany Hall, this and that, with people like John Kelly, Honest John Kelly, and look at that history and see that it's a little bit more complicated than you want to make it. Where the Irish came in because they felt that they had to. And once again, they thought very racially as well. Now, of course, like I say, but once again, we see things in this one way, and it's and we see things in this spectrum right now, as of 2020 or the mid 20s, and they don't want to look at it past anything else. So that anyway, I'm just kind of repeating myself at this point. But anyway, let's carry on.
Bigotry is intersectional. There aren't a lot of single-issue bigots, people who hate Mexicans but fight for everyone else's rights. People generally don't apply this hierarchical thinking to just one aspect of their lives. So, commonly, racism is comorbid with anti-Semitism, is comorbid with misogyny, is comorbid with transphobia, is comorbid with homophobia, is comorbid with religious intolerance. I mean, just listen to a Klansman talk about Catholics sometime, or better yet, don't. Any marginalized group may be inducted into the tribe to consolidate against a common enemy, but should that enemy be defeated, the inductees become the new enemy. We can see the history of social progress in the US as successively disenfranchised groups demanding and sometimes gaining their rights one by one, with reactionaries trying to beat back the tide. Transphobia is recently rampant in fascist circles, and conservative politics, because with the legalization of same-sex marriage, the battle against homosexuality is thought to be lost, or at least at a ceasefire. This gives some cause to welcome gay transphobes into the ranks, but should they seize enough power to strip what few protections trans people have gained recently, and the alliance is no longer useful, their gaze refocuses, and it's last hired first fired for the homosexuals.
Okay. So let's get into this point here. And he does have a point. And I think he is correct to a point where it's like, yeah, we make deals with some folks, but ultimately those folks will just be killed later on. They'll be the new enemy. And there's a point to that. But the thing is, what you don't realize is, here's some extra stuff that you talk about with Milo Yiannopoulos. Of course, once again, we just show the picture, and you know, you don't want to explain it. You don't want to make it too easy for your people. But the thing is that Milo Yiannopoulos was outed because he supported pedophilia. That was the whole idea. Is a lot of people agree with that. But of course, ultimately, it's just like, well, the alt-right just got tired of him. He got too much power. He didn't get too much power. And the thing is, what happened is they kicked him out. He lost his house, and he was bad with money. And now he's stuck to debating, second-tier bread tubers, these type of folks. I can't even think of who he debated on Great Debates or whatever that debate channel. It's just ridiculous. He did it to himself. The thing is that, we're going to kick him out because he gained too much power. No. They kicked him out because he said dumb shit. That's why. Something that you yourself would disagree with. I mean, how many times does the left kick people out? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's this video. Maybe not. Like I say, I kind of just glazed over his stuff. It all kind of sounds the same to me. But I think that he talks about the same type of thing where it's like, we use this information, but then he was accused of rape. So it's like, well, I can't vouch for that type of thing. And the thing is, it's so petty. I was listening to Danky Kang's stream because I need a good laugh. And I heard him, say that they don't like Caleb Maupin anymore because he was next to Dugan. And it's like, come on. They love to bring that up. They love to bring up that issue like it's a big thing. It's just absolutely ridiculous, Anywho, I think I'm kind of just bringing it back to August 8th, 2020 here. I'm using this as a time capsule in a way. So let's go ahead and continue on here. It looks like there's some more good stuff to mention. So let's continue on, shall we?
And then the African Americans, and then the women, and on, stripping rights from social groups in the order opposite to which they were gained, like the plot of Final Destination 2.
Brief little point here, of course, is that the suffrage movement in the 1920s was considered white supremacist because ultimately it was suffrage for white women. So, of course, ultimately, that's kind of a misplaced history. But nonetheless, I think I want to point that out as kind of an actually. So, I just figured I'd point that out. Continue.
You might be thinking the end goal here is a nice homogenous group of white men to sit at the top of the pyramid. And white fascists would be thinking the same thing. But in reality, there is no end game. It's not like if the fascists get their ethnostate, they're just gonna call it a day. It's the flaw in obsessing over racial purity. Whiteness is defined by what it's not.
So this is the whole type of thing that you'll get with that Murdoch video. Once again, I don't know if my audience will see. I've seen that. Some will. But that pure Bavarian phenotype video where it's just like, we have to go for purity. We have to go for this. The thing is that that's it's partly true and partly not. The thing is that, the Mischlingers were in the German army. And they were in, they were in the system, so to speak. But then by the end of the campaign in France, a lot of those Mischlingers then were kicked out. But they weren't put into camps as far as I know, this and that. So I think that it's a very mixed bag. Now, ultimately, I know, are you carrying water for the Nazi regime now? And I'm not. I'm just saying is that let's try to look at things in a more concrete way. That's all I'm trying to say here. And we're going to see here once again, it's this part of this just the fear-mongering that we need. Ultimately, I would love to see him do a leftist playbook. I would love him to see do an Antifa playbook or something like that. But he doesn't want to do that because it's easier for him to just conflate the difference between conservatism versus fascism. It's easier that way. It's easier. So anyway, let's continue.
If it isn't contrasted with something else, it ceases to be an identity. So if the whites kick all the non-whites out of their country, suddenly the Irish and Italians aren't white anymore. And then maybe the albinos, or the brunettes, or the Virginians. It doesn't matter. The rules are made up. One way or another, the pyramid grows thinner. The authoritarian mindset is one that just likes stripping rights from people. Leave authoritarians no one to strip rights from, and they start stripping them from each other. And yes, that's what the research says. The other outlet for this restless energy is war, invasion, colonization. Deport all the Mexicans, and then follow them into Mexico. Go seeking an other to define yourself against. Now, you've maybe noticed that these three drives, the seeking out of conflict, the need to subjugate more and more people, and the shrinking of one's base of power, is not a recipe for success. Most hierarchical systems seek equilibrium, finding the point where the masses are just happy enough that they don't disembowel you.
The thing is, I love the conflation between, well, fascism and authoritarianism. Now, of course, once again, I will give him some credit that he does have some logic here. The thing is, though, is that they don't want to define what their actual system is. This is a very essential aspect of him. It's easy to critique. It's easy for me to make these videos. Ultimately, I'm just going to say I go along with the flow, and I'm just going to see what happens. Now, of course, like I say, maybe that's more of a manlet sort of mindset or a brainlet sort of mindset where it's just like, well, I'm just going to see what happens. But I think it's more realistic. We can all LARP and say, well, we want this, or, Deus Vult, or whatever the case may be, but it seems more realistic to me, just wait and see what happens. And then we'll play by that. But of course, the thing is that people like him in general don't want to do this. And I think at the end of the more long style video that he's done, the more detailed essays that he's done, I think that he talked a little bit about, while it's been grinding to see that, grinding to see this progression or whatever the case may be, that, maybe it will come to be this and that. So it's kind of simplified here, but anyway, let's continue on here.
But the trajectory of fascism is to make enemies, cast out allies, narrow the gene pool, and stuff your ill-gotten wealth into the military until you're fully stocked with the kinds of weapons that ensure mutual destruction. I'm not the first to say, white fascism is a suicide cult. The history of fascism is one of atrocity, followed by failure, followed by disgrace. So modern fascists operate in a cycle of constant reinvention as they try to distance themselves from the movements that...
And yet he uses a single 12-year time frame. Now I notice, of course, that he used Franco, this and that. It's interesting, of course, he didn't talk about the fact that Franco ruled until his death in 1975, and it was only then, after a lot of revolutions, that now we have Spain as it is. Now, of course, like I say, you can get into the whole, well, Franco was a turncoat to the phalangists, this and that, and that ultimately he was a bootlicker for the king, or whatever the case may be. But nonetheless, this is something that a lot of people talk about as well, is that Franco was admired somewhat by Castro and by Che Guevara. Now, of course, they don't want to say anything about that, or they'll just say, oh, that's fascist tactics, or how dare they try to do that, those silly fascists. So it's very funny to me, of course, that your only viewpoint is just talking about the Nazi regime, which lasted 12 years. You also don't want to talk about the Holy Roman Empire or anything else like that. And I know, maybe I'm reaching a little bit. I'm playing Stretch Armstrong right now, or Plastic Man. Let me back up off that. What I will say is that he is vastly oversimplifying things to make his point. And of course, to say white fascism is a suicide cult, he has to put the pejorative of white in there, which is always a recipe for disaster.
Came before. The ideology doesn't change, but the rhetoric does. Primarily by stealing rhetoric from the left because it's flatly more popular. White nationalists calling themselves identitarians is an appropriation of progressive identity politics. The rhetoric of white power is an intentional bastardization of black power movements. Even the Nazis, while instituting a dictatorship, knew to call themselves socialists, and despite German anti-fascism being formed predominantly by socialists, and the first death camp being originally built to throw communists in, some people still believe this? This appropriation of rhetoric is how each generation of fascists rebrands itself. We're not like those fascists who got hanged for what they did. We're young, hip, and successful. Come back, baby.
Once again, I'll give him the credit that a lot of lefties will always say, well, the right steals from the left, or that fascists steal from the left all the time. And what I will say to this is that you guys make it so easy because ultimately you guys are so cringe. I've asked this question before, and I remember that I didn't really get a good answer. But I was like, well, why is it so easy? Why do we make it so easy for them? Why don't we brand ourselves better, this and that, as leftists? And they don't have an answer for that. Ultimately, it's just, well. And of course, the constant battles that go back and forth and everything else, especially with the American left. The constant battles that go on about sexuality, or this, this researcher that we were using was a rapist, this and that. We're going to talk about, Twitter drama, things that, the split between BreadTube and MLs, and of course, like I say, that's online stuff. But even out in the streets, we saw, of course, Chopper Chaz. And of course, we saw 2 people get killed. One person was killed by, they said it was gang beef, but ultimately they said it was a guy that had on a Black Lives Matter shirt. So Lorenzo Anderson, the guy that I believe he was a SoundCloud rapper, was killed by a guy who supported BLM. And of course, the second one being a kid that was driving a Jeep Grand Cherokee, was running it through the park there, Anderson Park, and then came up to one of the spots, didn't want to stop, was probably scared. I think he was like 14 years old. They came up, shot him, and then they went up right to the driver's seat and they shot him again. Now, of course, a lot of leftists said, yeah, we got the fascists. Turns out, those 2 kids were actually POCs. And of course, this still hasn't been talked about and hasn't been brought up in any serious motion. And, ultimately that shows how they take an L. But ultimately, it goes to show, it's like, yeah, I will give you the point that, the right steals from the left, or the fascists steal from the left. Yeah. But the thing is, though, is that if you guys weren't so bad at implementing your ideas and weren't so, talk about purity, you guys want, once again, I used to say this, and I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but is it the right, or at least, the fascists view things in purity of race or purity of idea, whereas the left sees things in purity of thought and purity of action. And there's a difference. Is that you can be a mixed black kid who lives in Arizona who fights for freedom, this and that. But ultimately, if you're the right ideology and if you push for the right things, then you will be respected. But otherwise, you'll be seen as reactionary, this and that. If you talk with people like Dugan, like Caleb Maupin did, well, you're a bad guy. Has to be put into context.
It'll be different this time. So with all this explanation of what fascists believe and how they operate, I hope it's clear that there is no workable definition of fascism that does not include the alt-right. They are, to the letter, a white fascist movement. That's neither a diss nor an exaggeration. It's a simple statement of fact. So then, to ask the trickier question, is the current administration fascist? And, well, that depends on where you draw the line between fascist and opportunist. Consider the evidence. The administration has staffed a number of fascist figureheads. It's repeated a number of fascist slogans. It employs a nationalist thinking in which the nation should always get more out of any deal than the other participants. It holds the hierarchical belief that the president need not follow the same laws as the citizens. It relies on fear and demonization of a racial other and portrays their mere presence in society as an invasion. It permits and makes justifications for violence against dissenters. It threatens to strip rights from opponents and members of the press. It relies on nostalgia for a mythologized past to sell a narrative of cultural rebirth. And its followers are intersectionally bigoted against women, the poor, Muslims, black people, trans people, and queer people. The only hesitance I feel around saying, this is fascism, centers around intent.
Okay. For those that are still listening, I do appreciate y'all, because I know that y'all are like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to watch this whole thing. And I know when I see this video uploaded, possibly in September, like I say, this is going to be, it's only going to be like, y'all can barely stand 5 minutes, but I get you. Y'all do not want to sit through this whole thing, believe me. And I get it. Believe me, I do. But the thing is, once again, I just hope at this point it's just like, oh, well, Trump's a fascist, this and that. And of course, ultimately, the whole thing is that a lot of the alt-right, he mentions, of course, the alt-right fits it to a T. And once again, they live in the whole mindset where it's like, yeah, the alt-right has already given up on Trump. They gave up on him a long time ago. They were talking about voting for the Democrats. Same as as what a lot of the left-wing people are saying. Not just the hashtag resistance folks, but now, but of course, it's the same thing with a lot of these conservatives as well, the Lincoln Project. Or they're just like, well, we're going to put in Democrats that agree with us that are kind of socially conservative, so that's good enough, So it's interesting to say the least. We're in an interesting time. And ultimately, you think that Biden is going to change any of those types of things? No, he is not going to change any of that. So, whatever's going to happen is your guess and my guess, and hopefully we'll just have to see what happens, won't we? It's easy for us all to predict what's going to happen. Oh, well, Biden has good foreign policy, people like Bo the Fifth Column have said, or oh, well, Biden is gonna reverse the whole thing and we're gonna get transgender money back and blah, 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 we'll just have to see what happens, won't we? That's an interesting thing about the future. Let's carry on from there. We're getting to the end, folks. We're getting there. Just hang on. Just the last few feet. We're gonna crawl to the finish line. We're gonna get there.
How much of what they do and say do they believe in, and how much is just riding a wave of fascist sympathy to fuel a narcissistic lust for power and ram through policies that make them rich? But ultimately, while there is some tactical value in this distinction, you have to deal with an opportunist differently from a true believer. In most contexts, the difference doesn't matter. Many will just tell you the correct term for Nazi sympathizer is Nazi. But if you won't take that leap, consider this. Even if they have no particular plan or aptitude for creating a fascist government, any body in power that uses fascist rhetoric, lays the groundwork for future fascism, and empowers fascist movements needs to be at least viewed through the lens of fascism. Whether or not they're fascists in their hearts is a question for historians. Whatever they are,
So this idea, once again, is that, well, it's up to the historians to decide, is clearly an appeal to authority. Well, we're going to leave it up to the historians to decide and everything else. Talk about authoritarian. I mean, maybe I'm being disingenuous when I say it, but it's just like, well, we have to leave it to the scientists. We have to leave it to these folks. We have to leave it to the professionals. Leave it to the professionals. And once again, talk about creating an aristocracy and this type of thing. It's like, it doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, well, fascists don't know, what's going on with that. But it's like a lot of the time with these leftists, now I hate to say it like this, but a lot of the time with these democratic socialists, people like him, people like Ian Danskin, or, anarchists like Bo the Fifth Column, they will talk about, all this LARPing stuff that we're going to do for the system and that we need to be part, we need to be there for the people and we need to start, dual power structures, this and that. But then they still will bend the knee for scientists because they say, oh, well, they have more knowledge than us. Oh, they know better than us. So there you go. Boom. And it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? This idea that, well, we're going to support these folks and we're not going to, support the rest. You're creating your own hierarchy, and it's ridiculous to me. Anyway, I think I'm just going to leave the rest of this stuff off here. This is 1 hour and 8 minutes here. Oh my goodness, this is going to be kind of long. So actually, I'm just going to leave off this bit here at the end, because basically it's just, I don't really care. So we're going to keep it there, and I hope y'all have a good day. And I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and you can hit that like button. And if you really like this, you can hit the subscribe button, and you'll get similar content coming out pretty regularly, semi-regularly. I think I'll try to come up with a schedule of when I'm going to start streaming this and that. And anyway, I'm going to keep it there, and y'all have a good rest of the day. See you later. Bye-bye.